And get started and just admit people as they start coming into the room. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this online program. My name is Barry McKnight with the La Crosse Public Library, and this is the second screening, or the screening of the second set of videos for the Enduring Families Project, and we're very proud to be helping them get the videos out. So just a couple notes before we get started. If everybody could please keep their microphones muted, that'll help with the sound quality, and it will also, we won't get any feedback. If you have questions during the program, please put them into the group chat, and then after the airing of the videos, I'll sort of field those questions to the Enduring Families Project people, and we'll kind of go from there. So let's see. All right, so one other note, we are recording this session, and we'll make, the La Crosse Library will make this available probably in the next couple days after the program is. So if you missed anything, you want to go back and view it. You can also view these videos at the Enduring Families Project YouTube channel. So to search for Enduring Families Project, you can find these two as well as the previous three that were done there. Also would like to give a shout out to the La Crosse County Historical Society. They are the sponsors for the Enduring Families Project. So they've, Denise can talk a little bit more about their involvement a little bit, but we'd like to give them a nod as well. And I think without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Denise Christie. Welcome, Denise.
Hi, thank you, Barry, and thank you everyone for coming and showing your support for our project. Rebecca Mormon and I are very grateful to you for your continued support of our project. I'm the producer. Rebecca is the historian who does the research for the pieces that we do together. We'll say a few things before the videos get started. The project is 2 years old. We started in June of 2018 with a bus tour of downtown La Crosse. And since the bus tour, there's been a lot of interest in our group. We have been a part of social justice groups. We've done performances for historical societies in West Salem and in West Salem and Holman. And before the virus came about, we were going to do one in Viroqua. We did a Juneteenth presentation. We were able to do something like a bus tour virus style in June. So we've been pretty active, and it just goes to show that this project is very much needed in the community. Rebecca is our historian, and I guess she will say a few things or not, but I know she's going to talk later on. But for now, I know that Margaret Lichter has done some research on George Pogue, which is going to be one of the two videos that we're going to see. The videos are of George Pogue and Lillian Davenport. And I know there's been a lot of interest in Pogue, and Margaret Lichter was one of the historians that wrote a book about George Pogue, and it's called George Coleman Pogue, An Olympic Legacy. And I know Margaret has to leave. So Margaret, anything you want to throw out there?
Sure, Denise. Denise had asked me if I might give just a little bit of background on how that book came about. So I will keep this as brief as I can. It dates back to 2012. And Steve Caroline, who was at the time the parks director in La Crosse, heard a program on local radio. It was related to the Olympics. The Summer Olympics were going on in London that year. And there was a program that was talking about Lacroixans who participated in the Olympics, two of whom medaled. And one of those one of the names he heard was George Pogue, of course. And he'd never heard of Pogue. He'd never heard that name before. While he's not from La Crosse and hadn't been here for a long time, it still struck him as odd that he'd not come across that name. And he said he didn't think that there seemed to be any memorial or any kind of tribute to Pogue. So he did some homework and found that there isn't one, as we all know, or knew at the time, and reached out to me because I had just written some history, interpretive plaques for him for some of the local parks. So Granddad's Bluff and Copeland and a few others have these historical interpretive markers that I have put together for him. And he said, well, you're kind of my history go-to. Can you just see if you can find something on Pogue? And it didn't take long. I mean, I barely scratched the surface, and I found out that Bruce Mauser and Ed Hill and David Waters, who's still actively, the latter is still actively researching Pogue. David's at Viterbo. The other two gentlemen are retired from La Crosse, UWL, as you know, are the three gentlemen who've done the vast majority of the work on Pogue. And so what I was able to do was just take their primary research. My research was really secondary. I took their primary research and synthesized it, put it all together, and in the form of a report to him. That was one part of the report. The second part was about Hood Park, because at the time, Steve had monies that he was available to him, he was going to use to renovate the park. And in his mind, there was a real possibility that he could renovate the park and maybe link it to Pogue. Maybe we rename the park Pogue Park, which of course, as you know, happened, but he wasn't sure what the possibility of doing that was. The park at the time was called Hood Park, and there is a branch of the train company family that bears the name Hood, and it had been kind of commonly believed by many people in La Crosse that Hood Park was named after this branch of the train family. And he said, I need to find out why the park is called Hood and if there was any possibility of renaming it. So the other chunk of my research related to Hood Park and its history. And what I found, scouring the archives at UWL, hi Laura, and over at the public library, is that the park was actually named after the first surveyor of the city. So it had no relation at all to the train company. And this gentleman, Mr. Hood, who had surveyed La Crosse back in the late 1850s, had moved to Galesville with his family and wasn't in La Crosse very long. And then he passed away and his family moved to California. So there was sort of no legacy to this Hood family in La Crosse beyond the park carrying his name. So that gave, in Steve's mind, that was a green light to go ahead and see if he couldn't suggest that the park be renamed for Pogue. So the two components of the report were a little bit on who George Pogue was and what his accomplishments were, the vast accomplishments, and then the history of Hood Park and the feasibility of changing the name. So you look like you wanted to say something, Denise.
No, I'm just saying this really falls in line with the very opening lines of the Pogue monologue. The reenactor says, oh, this park is finally remembering me. So it's really nice to have the context, the background of how the park came to be, since it's like, I think Terry's the one that wrote the script and she put it right there at the beginning. You're finally remembering this park is such a memorial to me. So that's very, it fits.
Yeah, so that's how it occurred. It really came up because of the mention of Pogue's name on the radio at the time of the Olympics 8 years ago. And so I wrote this report. The book you see is that report that was edited, drastically edited down. And Steve just bound it because he wanted to use it as a tool to go to the Parks Commission and argue for things. He just felt the material was so rich and so critical and really so important for our time that he wanted to do something more with it. And he also wanted to distribute this information to the local schools and so forth. So that's why it was bound. That's why it looks like a book, but it's really just a, kind of a report. So
And as I said before, Terry and Richard were the ones that really put the scene together, put the words in the mouths of our reenactor. And for a time, I was portraying Nellie Pogue, George Pogue's sister. So we just changed a few pronouns, and I became my brother. So, but you know, it worked out. And Terry and Richard were our storytellers that had been telling the story of George Pogue through the eyes of the Eastons, who were the employers of Anna Pogue and her family during George Pogue's growing up. Terry and Richard, you got anything to say out there? Terry and Richard, I mean, Terry and Richard.
Here we are.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, as Denise said, we're storytellers. We're both educators. Richard taught history for many years in the middle school and felt that the Pogue story was one that needed to be told. And, you know, back then, not many people knew about him. So it took us a while to try to decide how to tell the story, of George Pogue. We finally decided on telling it from the viewpoints of Lucian and Mary Losey Easton. They were a prominent couple. George's mother, Anna Pogue, had worked for the Eastons and the Eastons' father, and they were very supportive of both George and his sister Nellie in their education, and that comes up a little later in the story. But we told it as a couple, but when Enduring Families came and Denise took it over as George's sister Nellie, you know, that was perfect. And now with the young man acting the part of George Pogue, it's just an excellent job of taking what little we had done and building on it. So thank you.
Oh, you too. Rebecca, are you out there? Did you want to kick in a few things before we see the video? Rebecca? Where are you?
Rebecca, you're muted.
Oh, the only thing I'd like to add is that the research for George Pogue, I don't want to leave him out, is Dr. Bruce Mauser, and the piece that he wrote for that now is in the hands of the Hutchinson Institute, I think that's what it's called, at Harvard University. And it's a phenomenal piece. And if people were interested in taking a look at it, you can find it online. It's a marvelous piece in terms of taking a look at George Pogue's life.
Okay. I think that's it. Should we go on to see the video?
Denise, can I just throw something in?
Sure.
So when I was teaching history, one of the stories we told was the story of the steamboat War Eagle. And there's another Black man who's unknown in La Crosse history, Felix Spiller, in that story. And because that was a story that got me started on sort of these forgotten people in La Crosse's history, particularly minority people. And then, of course, because I learned so much about Felix Spiller and the War Eagle, then this George Pogue thing popped up. So it was kind of another person, another unknown hero, as we kind of started to say. So that's another part of how it all got started.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Barry, before we move?
I think we'll go ahead, and so folks, we're going to watch the first video on Pogue, then we'll come back briefly for some introductory remarks from Denise, and then we'll watch the second video, and then we'll go into a Q&A after the airing of that one. So give me a moment here.
Welcome to Pogue Park. Ground was broken here in 2015 to transform the old Hood Park into Pogue Park. It looks like I'm finally being remembered here in my hometown. I'm George Coleman Pogue. I was born on November 6th, 1880 in Hannibal, Missouri. My parents, James and Anna Pogue, were born into slavery, but were freed by the Civil War. Mom, though, was proud of her Freedom Papers, which means she was freed before 1861. I spent most of my childhood here in La Crosse. We moved here in 1884. My father worked as a coachman for Mr. A.W. Pettibone. My mother was a cook and domestic in their house, which is on the corner of 8th and King Streets. I was 3.5 at the time. My sister Lulu Bell was 17. My other sister Nellie was 6. Soon after we moved here, Lulu Bell married John J. Johnson, a coachman for Mr. Jason Easton. They soon had a son. His name was Freddie. Things changed though. Lulu Bell and her little boy later moved back in with our family, and we all lived on the Pettibone estate. Then, in 1887, Lulu Bell died. The next year, in 1888, my father died of tuberculosis. Just before my 8th birthday, my little nephew, Freddie, died of diphtheria. That left my mother, my sister Nellie, and me. Fortunately, Mother was a good worker, so she was employed as a cook and then a stewardess for the 2 mansions on the Easton estate on Cass Street. The Eastons were very supportive. Mr. Easton owned a stable of racehorses, and he taught me to ride. I love to ride fast, and I love to run. My mother firmly believed that an education would lift us above the crowd. The Eastons encouraged us to use their library for our studies. Nellie and I became the 2nd and 3rd black students at La Crosse High School. I love the library because I love to read. I was in the ancient classical course in high school. I studied a variety of courses for college. I worked hard and studied hard and graduated as salutatorian in my class in 1899. My academics, though, are not what got the city of La Crosse to name that park after me. It was my athletic gifts that brought this belated honor. I love to run. I was fast. So I became part of La Crosse High School's track team. In a meet against Winona, I won the 50-yard dash with a new Wisconsin state record, and the 100-yard dash, and the 220-yard dash. Then I took off my track shoes to win 2nd place in the standing broad jump. I had the crowd cheering for me. Newspapers said I was probably the greatest athlete in this city. My athletic gifts are also what got me into the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I joined the Public Speaking Society, the Literary Society, and had great success on the track team. I was the first black athlete to compete for the Badgers and the first to be a Big Ten champion. My coaches, teammates, and the spectators all respected and admired me. Once when the coach got called out of town, he asked me to take over the team. 1904 was the most groundbreaking year of all. It was the year of the 3rd Modern Olympiad. They were held in St. Louis, and on August 31st, I, George Coleman Pogue, won a bronze medal in the 400-meter hurdles. Can you imagine that? And the next day, I won a 2nd bronze in the 200-meter hurdles. Pretty impressive when you think about it. It was quite an achievement. By this time, my sister Nellie was teaching in East St. Louis. Our mother had joined her there. I also moved to the St. Louis area and eventually took a job at Sumner High School, the only all-black high school west of the Mississippi. I taught English and Latin there for 9 years. Eventually, I ended up in Chicago and chose to take a job as a postal clerk in Chicago and spent 29 years rising in the ranks of the Postal Service.
I had a good life in Chicago. I moved into the Rosenwald Apartments in 1930. I lived there with my mother for the remainder of our lives. I had a lot of interesting friends. Many lived at the Rosenwald Apartments. It was the residence of some of Chicago's up-and-coming African-American musicians and artists. I also managed to maintain acquaintances with several former students I had taught at Sumner High School. But the most flamboyant of my friends was another person who had grown up in La Crosse. Lillian Davenport. After graduation, she had moved to Chicago and had been a music teacher. But she decided to spend most of her adult life as a musician in vaudeville and the nightclub circuit.
George Pogue did not seek fame, but instead chose anonymity in his later life. He passed away quietly on April 11, 1962, at the age of 81. He was buried in an unmarked grave. There was no obituary. In 2015, a stone was placed on Pogue's gravesite with the quote, "Of matchless swiftness, but of silent pace." He paved the way for many who would follow. In addition to his athletic achievements, he was also an academic scholar who spoke 4 languages fluently. George Pogue was certainly a groundbreaker, and Pogue Park is a tribute to his legacy.
Okay, so Denise, do you want to talk a little bit about the next video we're going to watch?
Sure. The next video, and then we'll talk about both of these afterwards. The next video is Lillian Davenport, who was born in La Crosse in the late 1800s. And as you saw from the earlier video with George Pogue, both he and she lived together at the Rosenwald Apartments after she had retired from her career as a professional musician. And you saw all of the famous people that our wonderful historian Rebecca was able to find out lived there with them. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, and talk to someone who actually knew Lillian Davenport, who affectionately called her Lil. But we'll talk about all of that after the video. So this is Lillian Davenport.
My name is Lillian Smith Davenport. I was born here in La Crosse in December of 1894. I was the youngest of 4 children born here. My grandmother, Mrs. Clara Johnson, was born into slavery in Georgia in 1842. She was freed after the Civil War when she was in her 20s. She came to La Crosse with the rest of our family in August of 1885. The family at that time consisted of my mother, Emma Smith, my father, Joseph Smith, an older brother, Robert, and a sister, Amy. 2 more children were born when the family moved here. Another brother, Richard, in 1887, and then me. Unfortunately, I didn't get to know my father very well at all. He passed away shortly after I was born. My mother and grandmother were successful housekeepers and caterers in the area. They ran a successful catering shop right outside of the house. They serviced the most upscale families in La Crosse and catered the annual Emancipation Ball in 1887. This was a big event in the La Crosse area. It was the celebration of the liberation of enslaved people, first in Haiti and then here. Mother and grandmother were called on to cater the picnic during the day and the evening ball at night. There were bad times too. My brother Richard decided to leave La Crosse and moved to Winona, Minnesota. But he was killed in a train accident in 1908. Now, the police decided to run an investigation to see if he had been the victim of foul play. But according to the people that were with him, Richard fell asleep on the bumper of a train, and then he fell off the train onto a railroad track. And then he was run over by an oncoming freight car. Of course, the coroner also told us that he had a head wound, which was similar to a bullet wound. The official report was that his death was an accident. And we had to accept that fact, reluctantly, but it was the only way we could move on with our lives. But I'll tell you something, it was really hard. I graduated from La Crosse High School in 1913. I think you call it Central High School today. And then I enrolled at La Crosse Normal School, which today you call UWL. I enrolled in their music department. In 1915, the music department put on an elaborate pageant, and it was called The Mask of Marsh and Rivers. It was held in Myrick Park on Tuesday, June 8, 1915. You see, the pageant was an allegory, and it had a very strong message. You should not let the beauty of nature be sacrificed because of man's greed. Now, the faculty members were the humans in the play, and the rest of us were the people in the woods. We were trees and flowers and birds, you name it. Now, some of us, myself included, were water lilies, and we danced merrily with the frog to the theme song of the pageant. And that theme song was entitled, Tonight the Woods Have Tongue Again. There were 1,000 people that bought tickets to sit in the slopes that night and listen to that wonderful pageant. It was quite memorable.
Tonight the woods have tongue again, tonight the streams run free, and all the world grows young again, and birds and leafy tree. Hearing the old tune sung again, hearing the old rune sung again, shall join our forest minstrelsy, shall join our forest minstrelsy, shall join our forest minstrelsy.
I graduated from La Crosse Normal in 1917, and then for a short time I taught music at Washington School, which is right down the street on 16th and Vine. But then I decided that I was going to be a professional musician. So I moved to Chicago. I spent the rest of my adulthood in Chicago, but I traveled around a lot. My entry into the world of vaudeville came in 1920 when I was music director of Bowman's Cotton Blossoms. Now, this was a very popular song and dance group on the vaudeville circuit. I also performed in the South on the Negro vaudeville circuit. In much of the 1920s and 30s, I was a musical director and conductor for several successful vaudeville performers. One performer was Clara Smith. Now, she recorded on the Columbia record label. Another was Margaret Johnson, and she led the Margaret Johnson Trio. I was even privileged to be musical director at the Lyceum Theater in Cincinnati for a short time. The Chicago Defender was the leading newspaper in Chicago that kept up with events in the African American community. Bob Hayes was the manager of the Here and There section of the paper, and I wrote to him regularly to let him know where I was going to be performing. You see, I wanted to make sure that people knew where I was performing. And thanks to him, the Chicago Defender really followed my career, and they posted very favorable reviews of my performances. Billboard magazine even followed my career. At one point, they said that I was a fantastic pianist and a hot singer. Oh, I was a professional musician and I loved it. But I've got to tell you something, there were some things that I had to deal with. And traveling had a lot to do with it. I was very fortunate in that a lot of opportunities came my way, and I accepted the parts that I could. Now, my first husband was Jeb Davenport. Now, he was a famous musician in his own right, but he and I had a very famous and successful comedy and music act, and this was called Davenport and Davenport. I was also professional partners with some other people. There was Davenport and Churchill, and then Davenport and Turner. Now, the Davenport and Turner act was supposedly very successful. Bob Hayes thought it was the most successful musical act he had ever seen. And then there were the personal relationships. I had more husbands than just Jeb. There were about 2 or 3, but I couldn't hold on to husbands very much. With all the traveling and instability of the craft, husbands just weren't in the cards for me. But that was okay. I visited my mother regularly when I did performances in this area. One time I was performing a set of shows in Boston, and I came down to La Crosse to visit with my mother and the rest of my family. This was in late 1941, just before the United States entered World War II. And there were soldiers coming into La Crosse from Camp McCoy. Now, these were both black and white soldiers that came. There were both white and non-white soldiers that were coming into La Crosse to socialize. And it was around this time that I started seeing signs pop up in the windows of the taverns and the restaurants. And those signs read, "No colored trade solicited." Now, up to that point, I had tried to avoid racial confrontation as much as I could. But on this occasion, I couldn't look away. I got in touch with Wisconsin's chapter of the NAACP. And they got in touch with Wisconsin's Attorney General, who at the time was John E. Martin. And you know he had those signs taken down. Of course, it really didn't end discrimination, though. After the war, I continued to sing in nightclubs, even as interest in vaudeville decreased and interest in jazz music increased. I decided to settle down permanently in Chicago, and I became a music teacher in the Chicago Public Schools. I was fortunate enough to run across another person who had grown up in La Crosse, and we got to know each other better when we were both residents at the Rosenwald Apartments. This was George Coleman Pogue. Now let me tell you something about George Coleman Pogue. He had a little history of his own, see. He was the first African American to win medals at an Olympic event. He won 2 bronze medals in the 1904 Olympics for the 200-meter and the 400-meter hurdles. Now, later on, he taught school in St. Louis for about 10 years. And then he moved to Chicago and spent the most of his adult life working in Chicago's post office. So we connected. We were both residents at the same apartment complex. I had a lot that I had to deal with, some challenges that I had to face. The major challenge was trying to figure out a way to keep my music alive, to keep my creativity alive, all against the backdrop of legalized discrimination. Now, keeping up with my family, connecting with my friends, reconnecting with another person from my hometown, all of these helped me to stay balanced, both as a person and as an artist. If I should get a notion to jump into the ocean, ooh, if my man ain't got no money, and I say, take all my money, ain't nobody's business.
Lillian Davenport passed away in Chicago on September 28, 1964. She was 69 years old. She is buried in an unmarked grave along with the rest of her family in Oak Grove Cemetery.
So there you have it. Lillian Davenport.
Nice. Great. All right. So, well, folks, so if those of you who joined kind of later, we'd like to have people put the questions into the chat, and then I'll field those questions to the Enduring Families Project folks. So the I guess the first question I'd like to throw out there would be to Vicki and Phil. How about Phil would go first? Can you talk about your involvement in the project, what your role was, and what your experience was like? You're still muted, Phil.
Hello. Yes, I was the videographer and co-directing director as well, and I did the editing. I have a background in theater and acting and directing, and I also do photography for the La Crosse County Historical Society. So this was a perfect match for me. History, the acting, the directing, and I've always been interested in the hidden history of La Crosse, if you will. I had heard of Nathan Smith, that one of the stories we did, but I had not heard of George Pogue until I saw there was a tribute to him for Pogue Park. So that it grew my interest more and more. So I was grateful and appreciate being a part of these videos.
And Vicki? Vicki?
Vic, you're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
There we go. I think both of the characters are fascinating. They are colorful because they love the arts and multi-talented. I mean, George Pogue was very smart, very intelligent, but also the athletic ability. The actor that came to me was a friend of mine, their son, and she was post for this role. And so Isaiah has never acted before, but I think he did a great job. And he's born in La Crosse. And it was interesting for him too, because he did not know the history himself as a Black man. Also Lillian Davenport, of course, I was very fascinated with, because I love all characters that are show business, because I love musical people and singers. And I thought she was so incredibly strong. And I thought Denise was just excellent in portraying her. I watched the video for the first time and was very moved by it. When I was reading the script and just her story, I was what she endured, you know, and both of these characters, of course, intersect later. And I think that's so interesting in Chicago. The other thing, when you think about both of these characters, is that their parents were slaves. And that's just, you know, can you imagine what they achieved in a lifetime out of their parents who were slaves? I think children or anyone, adults, would be so inspired by their stories. Lillian Davenport having to endure her brother's death, yet going on and then standing up for the rights of Black people with the signs and
So she might have. Vicky, it looks like you might be having a little bit of connectivity issues. We can. So why don't we switch over to?
Uh-oh.
Let's see. There we go. Okay. Well, hopefully she can connect back with us. So Denise, let's head over to you here. I had a couple of questions in the chat, but I'll just kind of combine them with one we talked about earlier. So what was Lillian Davenport really like? You have a family connection to it. And then also, are there plans to mark her grave?
That I don't know the history of that. I just learned about her a couple of years ago when I portrayed her at the Silent City. Historical Society does reenactments at Oak Grove Cemetery, and she is buried there in an unmarked grave. And someone had talked about that. I don't know if there are any plans to mark her grave, but as you saw in the video, all of her other relatives are marked in their graves. But I was really interested a few months ago, my brother-in-law had mentioned Lil, L-I-L apostrophe. And I said, you mean the Lillian Davenport? And my brother-in-law and my husband, but my husband was younger, he doesn't have as many memories of her as Orby, my older brother-in-law, does. But my husband said, yeah, she used to come to the house and play the piano, and the piano in the video was just like their piano at the house. But I was wondering, but Orby, who's with us now, would have stronger memories of her. Could you share some of those memories about what the real Lillian Davenport was like, Orby? You're muted. Could you unmute when you start talking, Orby?
Okay. You know, this is amazing, because having been born and raised in La Crosse, and I got to tell Phil Addis this, I didn't know about George Pogue either. And I ran track at Logan. I ran track at La Crosse State. And I didn't know about George Pogue till I moved out of Wisconsin and read about him in some article. Lillian Davenport used to come to our house, and I think she was still on the circuit. And I believe she was like going from Milwaukee to the Twin Cities or something like that. Might even been that trip to Boston. But she would play the piano, and the piano was that upright, just like you had Denise in the film. I think I was probably maybe 4 or 5 years old. All I remember is both hands were flying on the keyboard and she was playing boogie woogie. And that attracted me to music. And when she would come through town, we could not wait to get her to sit at the piano. And I think she was probably tired from traveling because I don't want to go to the piano today. But, you know, my brother and I, we would push her to go to the piano. She'd sit down, she'd play for about 10, 15 minutes, and then she'd get up, and that was it for the time coming through La Crosse. But your project, Rebecca, Addis, and Richard and Terry, I'm amazed because I'm learning things that I never knew about La Crosse.
Okay.
That's great.
Thank you.
So both, this would maybe both to Denise and Rebecca, but maybe Rebecca more. So how do you hope these videos, these ones we've watched tonight, the ones we watched at the preview screening, and the future ones, how do you hope those are going to be used by teachers and students?
Well, I'm really excited about the fact that the La Crosse Public Schools has decided to work this into their curriculum. They're rewriting the curriculum this year, and COVID has kind of messed up everything in terms of how things are being done. But I worked with them in adapting or what their plans are, and the second grade teachers are working with the barbers in their classroom. So we haven't gotten to the barbers yet in producing the videos, but the barbers would be used in their classroom. The fourth graders are working with the Shivers family and the Cheyenne Valley. The sixth graders want to work with Pogue and Jenkins. And I know we didn't talk about the Jenkins family. Howard Jenkins is an uncle of George Pogue, and he was instrumental in the research for Brown versus the Board of Education. And they're working with the Road to Brown in their classroom history. And in high school, they're working with George Pogue and African-American women with suffrage movement. So those are the strands that they're working with curriculum. So these videos will be a big part of what they're working with in their classroom.
Fantastic. Denise, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Or?
I just want to comment that the illustrations for these videos, I've got to give a shout out to Rebecca as historian, because I mean, some of the illustrations that complement the words and the monologues are really quite amazing. I mean, finding out Lillian Davenport's husband, Jeb, finding a picture of him, finding the apartment that both Lillian Davenport and George Pogue lived in, and finding out all of those very famous people. I mean, Marian Anderson, Raisin in the Sun, Lorraine Hansberry. I mean, all of these famous people lived in in those apartments, and it was really a tribute to Rebecca to find this information that brings such warmth to the stories. I hope that going forward, the project, you know, once COVID is over, we can continue with some in-person interviews. Just before everything shut down in the spring, we were going to do a presentation in Viroqua. So hopefully we can get that going if we finish, you know, once we're back on track. Ideally, we want to have 6 more videos, but because of the surge in the virus, because of the holidays, that might have to wait until the spring of 21 before we continue. We want to ultimately have 11 videos. The next section of videos will feature people from Cheyenne Valley. And then we will have the videos about the barbers of La Crosse. So that's the future for the Enduring Families Project that I can see.
So one question I had was, you know, you've been involved in the Enduring Families Project sort of behind the camera, but how did it feel to be portraying Lillian Davenport? How did it feel to be portraying one of these historic figures? What did it mean to you?
It was really interesting. I found out about Lillian Davenport, like I said, 2 years ago. Laura Godden, I think she's here tonight, found all of this information at the Murphy Library, and we put it together, and the monologue was originally conceived. We put it together for the Silent City, and it was just amazing. I did not know about her. I thought, oh, there were a lot of oohs and ahs, so I was really thrilled to find out about her then, and then to see it continue with this project. I really enjoyed portraying her and learning more about her, and more information that turned up about her. So it was a thrill.
Well, we just had a comment in there. It seems like you were made for that role, that it looked like you were enjoying yourself.
Oh, that's my sister-in-law. Thank you. Thank you, Grace. Thank you.
We did also have a question. Are the videos from September posted? Yeah, they're posted in a couple places. So first, the Enduring Families Project has its own YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and search Enduring Families Project, all 5 videos are there. You can also find them at the website for the La Crosse County Historical Society. That's where all the individual videos are. There is on the La Crosse Public Library's YouTube channel the video of the program we did in September with the first 3 videos and the comments from the actors and things like that, if people want to check that out as well. So you can see the individual ones on the first 2, and you can see the previous program at the La Crosse libraries.
I just wanted, when we started putting together the monologue for Lillian Davenport, Laura had found this information about her being in this play, The Mask of Martian Rivers. And when we had been doing the in-person videos, presentations, you know, I just sang, I mean, not as good as Dodie, our vocalist for the video, but I sang, sort of sang. Well, I sang the theme song, Tonight the Woods Have Tongue Again. But when we were going to do the video, I thought, now how can we do this? And so we had to find a younger Lillian Davenport and sort of recreate part of the pageant that she would have been in that scene in 1915. So I was very happy when Misty Lowe from Misty's Dance Studio was able to recruit Maria, who's with us tonight, and the 2 younger ones, the Azinas, and their mother, Nicole, is with us tonight also. So for the dance scene, by the way, those beautiful costumes were put together by Rebecca, our historian, who, when we both taught at School of the Arts, she was the costumer for the theater department. So those beautiful costumes are thanks to Rebecca. Just want another shout out to her. But just wanted to throw that out there.
Great. So are there any other questions in the chat? We got some nice comments about Denise and Rebecca. Denise, you're singing.
Oh, Rebecca, anything else you want to throw in there? I keep putting Rebecca on the spot, but I just thought there might be other things you wanted to add. If not, that's fine too.
No, thank you for the compliments. And I've just been reading the questions people have been writing, and everybody's answering them just fine.
Shout out to Dodie. Dodie Whitaker sang the song for the video that the ballet portion was about. So thank you to Dodie for that beautiful rendition. And she hopefully in the next couple of months we'll be doing her video. Dodie, did you want to say something?
Oh, I mean, I kind of wrote in the chat. I just am
Oh,
I just am fascinated by this project. It's amazing to me how much more footage you were able to find, Rebecca. And I just love how the videos have kind of grown in a way, kind of out of necessity. I know we were planning on doing them anyway, but this is just such a great way to present this project until we can get back in person again. And yeah, I've just been enjoying my newer character,
great.
Berletta, and yeah, looking forward to making that video. So
After
do have
this,
to
everybody.
I do
after
have to mention that all the libraries that are involved with this too, I'm picking from them as well. So it's not like I'm out there all by myself picking out things. I'm stealing from everybody that's involved.
you're borrowing. The history is for all of us, and they're all footnoted, right? I mean, they're all documented.
I try to make sure that everything is documented, and but I'm going at great lengths in many places all over the country borrowing stuff.
And Rochelle Bruin is with us, and she portrays Lydia Moss, who was a sister of Zachariah Lewis Moss. And just wanted everyone to know that she's one of the barbers that is going to be featured in our next, after this chunk of videos about Cheyenne Valley, then we will be doing a chunk of videos about the barbers of I want to say barbers of Seville, but barbers of La Crosse. So thank you for your continued support.
You're such a singer. You're such a soprano, Denise.
Say that again.
That would be Sweeney Todd, Denise. Not Barbara, Sweeney Todd.
Is that Rochelle?
Yes.
Rochelle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So an opera is next, right? That's what's.
Hey, Rochelle, good to see you. Good to see you.
Hi, everybody.
Lydia Moss. And Dodie is going to be Berletta Walden Moss. So, okay. Anything else we want to talk about, guys, or?
Well, looks like I think that kind of covers it, unless anyone has any more questions in the chat. Thank you all for attending. Again, from the library, we're very happy to be able to just play this small part in getting these aired. So we're looking forward to the third screening, which, as Denise said, hopefully that'll happen sometime this spring or summer. Right?
It sort of depends on the vaccine, how the the ferocity of the surge. The next video, hopefully we will be doing, will be the story of Ashley and Ellen Shivers. Ellen Walden Shivers was the sister of Dodie's character, Berletta Walden Loving. And Ellen Shivers and her husband, Ashley, lived in Hillsborough, well, Cheyenne Valley, and then moved to La Crosse, and later on to Madison, but that's their story. And then hopefully afterwards we will do the story of Berletta. So Dodie, you're on deck. And so we'll see. I'm hoping for mid to late winter, early spring, when we can start maybe have one or two more ready for you. Don't, it's not etched in stone, but that's the hope.
Right. Well, and just to, like I said earlier, just a reminder to folks, check out the Enduring Families Project YouTube channel if you want to see all 5 videos, or at the La Crosse County Historical Society. We'll be posting the video from this program, hopefully on the next couple days here. And at that same time, we'll also put a link to our YouTube channel on our Facebook page where you can see the previous program from September and get everybody's comments from that one. So thanks everybody for coming, and thanks to the Enduring Families Project people. Yep.
Barry, should a few of us stay on afterward?
Sure. Yep. Yeah. So thanks everybody else for coming, and have a good night. Yeah. Bye-bye.